Bell was a pathetic adventurer who was so weak that the monsters in the dungeon used him for target practice. However, when he falls for a hero baddie who saves his life, he unlocks a cheat ability that makes him stronger every time she gets him heated up. Aeons ago, the gods grew bored from cracking each other and decided to descend to Earth and live like mortals, just for the plot. They even sealed off their powers, yet they still bestowed blessings on those who worshipped them. Those blessings were the ability to fight monsters in a tower called Babel, and those who received them were known as adventurers and became the gods' familia. Bell was one of those people, but he was still very much a noob and would have been unalived by a raging minotaur if another adventurer hadn't cut it down. Her name was Eyes, and the simp fell in love with her the moment he looked her in the eyes. However, the guy was a wimp, so he ran away looking like a Thanksgiving chicken that just escaped a hot pasta sauce all the way back to the guild. When Irina, one of the receptionists, saw him, she was shocked and scolded him for tempting fate after he got the minotaur juice off his body. Bell didn't really care about that, as all he wanted was an exposition dump on Eyes so he could try to rizz her up. Ina advised him to give up because not only was Eyes way out of his league, but she also belonged to the Loki familia. Bell immediately became depressed, but Ina explained that girls like strong guys, and if he got stronger, Eyes might mistake him for Gojo Satoru. Instantly, Bell's mood changed, and he ran out while screaming that he loved Ina, much to her embarrassment. Later, when he returned to the abandoned chapel he lived in, Hestia, his goddess, almost tackled him to the floor in excitement. She then began fussing over him when she learned that he had almost died, but he assured her that he was fine. Relieved, she showed him the potato balls she bought for their dinner with money from her part-time job and swore they were better than whatever food was trending on TikTok at the moment. As they ate, Hestia complained about how no one else wanted to join her familia, but Bell encouraged her to be hopeful. Thanks to his positive words, the plotful lolly got all emotional, but then she quickly switched up and told Bell that it was time to update his status. She then had him lie on his stomach, and while she did her thing on his back, she told him to stop yapping about Eyes because a specimen hotter than bread was literally living with him. Suddenly, she saw something that made her gasp, but she refused to tell Bell what it was. When she gave him a copy of his stats, he saw that some of them had gone up, but he still had no magic or special skill. What he didn't know was that Hestia had intentionally concealed his Ray Yala's phrase, a cheat skill that would increase his stats by a lot depending on the intensity of his emotions. The next morning, Bell woke up to find Hestia sleeping on his chest and thought it was cute, until the cultured loli began subconsciously rubbing her melons against him. For the sake of keeping his holy rod holy, Bell quickly got away from her and then left for the dungeon. On his way, a waitress named Seer called out to him to return a gem he supposedly dropped. While they were speaking, Bell's stomach let out a battle cry, so she gave him her bento and invited him to eat at the restaurant where she worked that night. Bell accepted the invite and then spent the next few hours slaying monsters, while praying to one day reach Eyes' level. That evening, after Hestia checked his status, he was shocked to discover that his stats had gone up by 160 points. Excitedly, he began pointing them out to Hestia, but the goddess was too busy being jealous over the fact that he was leveling up because of another woman. So she grabbed her coat and, after screaming at him, stormed out to go to her part-time job, or so she claimed, because she ended up at the lake, sulking and complaining about how he already had her but was now pushing himself because of some dumb blonde. Meanwhile, Bell visited Seer's workplace, and the owner, Mia, gave him the night's special, which Bell knew would cost him an arm and a leg. While he ate, Seer kept him company, and a few moments later, the Loki familia walked in. Bell instantly froze at the sight of the love of his life, and when he came back to his senses, Seer revealed that the Loki familia were regulars at the place. So he immediately made up his mind to drop by every day so he could watch Eyes like a creep. Just then, he overheard Beta, one of Eyes' teammates, talking about him and how he was nothing but a wimp. Reveria reminded him that it was their fault that the Minotaur got to the 5th floor in the first place, but the stupid wolf man had drunk one too many pints, so he kept yapping and even asked Eyes whether weaklings like Bell were her type. Unable to bear the insults anymore, Bell ran out, ignoring Seer's calls and didn't even notice that Eyes tried to go after him too. He ended up in the dungeon, and despite being exhausted, he kept fighting because getting stronger was the only way to stand by Eyes' side. The following morning, when he dragged his exhausted and injured body back home, he found Hestia waiting for him. So he fell into her arms and, with a smile, told her that he wanted to get stronger by all means. Days later, Hestia checked Bell's stats, and, as she expected, they had risen again. So she got mad and started hitting him. However, she stopped and wondered whether or not to tell him about the skill already. In the end, she decided against it and told him that his hard work was finally paying off. However, she asked him to stop trying to be a one-man army because she didn't want to be without him. Bell promised to be extra careful in his quest for power, and that allowed her to relax. She then told him that she had some business to take care of and would be away for a few days, leaving him to wonder what she was up to. Later in the day, Bell returned to the restaurant and, after apologizing for dining and ditching, gave Mia what he owed. Seer said it was commendable that he returned and then gave him a bento so he wouldn't starve in the dungeon. After she walked away, Mia told him that the adventurers who returned home were the real winners and asked him to ensure he was one of them. Her words really motivated Bel because after she gave him a little push, he ran out smiling. That night, at the yearly banquet for the gods, Freya caught Hestia swiping dumplings from the food table, but she was kind enough not to make her feel weird about it. As they chatted, Loki came rushing towards them, looking all prim and proper, so Hestia swallowed her annoyance and asked about eyes. Aside from the fact that she was known as the Sword Princess, Hestia knew nothing else about her, but Loki wasn't interested in giving her the tea she wanted. This led to them literally butting heads until Freya complimented Loki's dress, so she straightened up like a prideful peacock. She then told Freya that she'd chosen that outfit so she wouldn't look broke. This was an obvious jab at Hestia, so the chibi goddess clapped back, saying Loki should have bought a dress, which didn't make her look like a stick figure Barbie doll. As expected, Loki didn't appreciate being reminded of her plotlessness, so she turned the banquet hall into a wrestling ring. After a few minutes of manhandling Hestia, she turned and stormed off in tears, while Hestia kept hailing her as the goddess of the melonless. Once she was out of sight, Hephaestus, who had just arrived, spoke up, asking when Hestia would stop trying to get underneath Loki's skin. Hestia excitedly jumped up and told the blacksmith god that she had been waiting for her arrival, but Hephaestus immediately said she had no money to give Hestia because Hestia had a history of leeching off her and her familia. Hestia argued that it wasn't so and then proudly reminded her that she now had a familia as well. Before they could get into the details of how her familia was still as broke as the Gintama caste, Freya told them that she had to leave because she had achieved her goal for attending the party. Once she left, Hephaestus asked Hestia what she wanted, and the half-pint goddess dropped to her knees and begged her to make a weapon for Bel. They had to continue that conversation in Hephaestus's workshop because Hephaestus had flat-out refused Hestia's request thanks to her inability to pay for her services. As Hestia continued groveling, Hephaestus asked why she was willing to lose her rep for Bel. Hestia explained that Bel was on a dangerous journey, so she wanted to give him a weapon to help him succeed. Moved by her sincerity, Hephaestus agreed to make the weapon on credit and then recruited Hestia to be her assistant for the job. A few days later, while Bel was on his way to the dungeon, Anya, Seer's co-worker, stopped him and asked him to take Seer's wallet to her. She forgot to mention that the girl had gone to watch Monster Philia until another employee, Anya, walked out and reminded her. Bel agreed to make the delivery but asked what Monster Philia was, since he wasn't originally from the city. They explained that it was the monster version of bullfighting, always hosted at the Colosseum by the Gensha Familia, and Bel became intrigued. Meanwhile, Hephaestus had just finished making Bel's new knife and handed it to an excited Hestia to deliver. Elsewhere, a cloaked Freya met with Loki and admitted that a certain boy had caught her attention and she wanted to see what he was made of. Before Loki could comment on the issue, Freya suddenly stood up and said she had somewhere to be, leaving Loki to pay her bill. A little while later, as Bel was trying to figure out how to navigate the Monster Philia crowd, Hestia suddenly called out to him and told him they were going on a date. While they were sharing some crepes, Freya knocked out the guards watching the monsters in the Colosseum's basement and picked one, saying it would help her with her mission. A few moments later, the silverback monster that Freya had released came swinging out of the Colosseum. The moment it set its eyes on Hestia, Freya's voice sounded in its head, urging it to chase after the tiny goddess. Noticing that it had its sights on Hestia, Bel grabbed her and ran, but the monster chased after them. With nowhere to hide, they ran into Daedalus Alley, which was very much a maze, but the monster still cornered them. Bel had to engage the monster head-on, but his knife shattered when he tried to stab it, and he got slapped into a wall like a pesky fly. Still, he refused to give up and threw a flash bomb at the whitewashed King Kong. He then grabbed Hestia and ran, while trying to figure out the best way to keep her safe. When they arrived at another part of the alley, he spotted a tunnel, so he put Hestia inside, locked the gate, and promised Hestia that he would buy her time to escape. Hestia tried to get him to change his mind, but Bel was determined to be her sacrificial lamb because he didn't want to lose another family member. It turned out that he used to live with his grandfather in a village somewhere, but then the old man was attacked by a monster in the mountains and died. While grieving, Bel decided to become an adventurer like the one in the stories his grandfather used to tell him. Unfortunately, that was easier said than done, as no familia was interested in taking in an inexperienced peepsqueak. After his last rejection, he was on the verge of losing hope, but then Hestia showed up and took him in. So he was prepared to die for her sake. Meanwhile, the Ganesha familia had discovered what had happened in the Colosseum's basement, so they went to inform Ganesha. Apparently, the monkey wasn't the only monster Freya let loose, so Ganesha instructed his people to cooperate with the other familia so they could find and slay the escaped monsters. As they ran off, Ganesha wondered what the culprit was trying to achieve, not knowing that Freya was aura farming on a roof somewhere, watching Bel struggle against the monkey monster. The worst part was that his last knife was shattered, and he became a sitting duck. At that time, Hestia was in the tunnels, feeling helpless, but then she recalled what Hephaestus had told her earlier about the knife being alive. Hestia had engraved some hieroglyphs on it, and it would awaken once Belle held it. Not only that, but it would also grow with him, reflecting how strong he had become. Hestia figured that getting the knife to Belle was the only way to stop him from going through with his crazy plan, so she got up and ran. Back at the Colosseum, Aina was informed of the monster situation. As she and her coworker tried to figure out how to get the other Familia to help, Loki and Eyes showed up and asked what the issue was. Back in Daedalus Alley, Belle was still engaged in a one-sided mortal combat with the monkey. When he got cornered, he recalled the Minotaur incident and wondered whether Eyes would show up again and be his knight in a white dress. Surprisingly, help came, but it was in the person of Hestia, whose loud voice drew the attention of the monkey. Seeing this, Belle regained his will to live and rushed to push Hestia out of the way before the monkey could attack her. After surviving a nasty tumble down a flight of stairs, Belle questioned Hestia, wanting to know why she had returned. Hestia gave him one of Dom Toretto's classic family quotes and reminded him that he'd promised not to leave her. She then tried to hand over the knife to him, but just then, the monkey won their little hide-and-seek game, so Belle picked her up and ran. Despite how life-threatening the situation was, Hestia couldn't help but smile because being in Belle's arms was a dream come true. Ignoring her words, Belle continued running until he found a false wall and kicked it open. While they were hiding on the other side, Hestia told Belle that he had to defeat the monster at all costs. Belle's face instantly dropped, and he admitted that he couldn't do that because he wasn't strong and had no weapons left. Hestia didn't try to console him and said white-haired characters were usually the ones who stole the plot, so he should start acting like the main character. As he stared at her in shock, she handed the knife to him and revealed that it was their ticket to the top. Meanwhile, Eyes had just finished off one of the escaped monsters when she was informed that the monkey was haunting Belle. Loki pointed out that Daedalus Alley was the worst place for them to have a showdown, but Eyes didn't care and rushed off. Not wanting to be left behind, Loki followed, while complaining that Eyes was a chronic workaholic. Back in the alley, Hestia updated Belle's stats and was shocked to see that it had over 600 experience points. Just as she rounded up, the monkey found them, so she gave Belle a push, and he charged at the monster with renewed determination. As he began fighting it, Hestia encouraged him from her hiding spot and told him that the knife was a reflection of how strong he was. Belle couldn't believe his eyes and ears, but the evidence was clear, so he kept going and didn't stop until what was left of the monster was just its gem and body armor. His victory drew a crowd which had been watching in secret, and while they praised him, Hestia excitedly jumped into his arms. Eyes arrived at that moment, and when she saw that everything had been taken care of, she turned away, accidentally hitting Loki in the nose with her sword. But she didn't care and kept walking as Loki chased after her. At the same time, Hestia suddenly fainted, causing Belle to cry out in worry. Freya was still watching them from afar, and she told herself that she couldn't wait to play with Belle again. That night, while Hestia slept in one of the rooms above Mia's restaurant, Seer apologized to Belle, saying if she hadn't forgotten her wallet, he wouldn't have gotten caught up in the monster mess. Belle assured her that she wasn't to blame, so she switched topics and told him that everyone, including her, thought he looked while fighting the monkey. She then shyly whispered that he charmed her and left to continue working in the restaurant. Before Belle could put two and two together, he heard Hestia calling for him, so he went to her. While they were talking, he asked where she'd gotten the knife from since Hephaestus' name was on the scabbard. Hestia answered that she had Hephaestus make it for him because she finally wanted to do something for him. Belle immediately asked how she had paid for it, since the weapons made by the Hephaestus Familia were very expensive, and she was dirt poor. Hestia told him not to worry his pretty head as she'd sorted it out, and Belle immediately broke down into tears, so she held him and let him cry to his heart's content. Days later, Belle went to the guild, and Aina nearly lost it when he told her he was heading to the dungeon's 7th floor. She reminded him that he had almost become cow feed on the 5th floor, but Belle assured her he would be fine. When he mentioned that his stats were now rank E, she called Cap and insisted on checking for herself. However, she couldn't believe her own eyes and had no choice but to agree to let Beldora the Explorer the heck out of the 7th floor. However, after taking one look at him, she decided he needed an armor upgrade and invited him to meet her the next day. Fast forward a few hours, and Aina took Belle to the weapons store owned by the Hephaestus Familia, while gawking at the weapons he could never afford in 5 lifetimes. A store clerk who turned out to be Hestia came to speak with them. After their shock passed, Hestia ignored his questions and asked who Aina was. The elf introduced herself as Belle's dungeon advisor, but the jealous goddess didn't believe her and warned her to keep her hands to herself because she was the only one authorized to ride the Belle coaster. After that, Belle and Aina got on the elevator and went up to the next floor, where they found cheaper weapons made by the beginner smiths of the Hephaestus Familia. Excitedly, Belle ran off to check out what the store had to offer and found a lightweight armor made by someone named Wealth. When Aina found him later, he told her he was going to buy it, and the girl didn't object. As they talked, she suggested that he hire a supporter for his next dungeon dive so that things would go smoothly for him, and he said he would think about it. Later, just before they parted ways, Aina gave Belle a protector as a gift and said she wanted him to always be safe. Belle shyly thanked her for the gift, and on his way home, he bumped into a girl named Lily while she was trying to escape an adventurer who wanted to hurt her. Bell quickly pulled out his knife and defended her, so the attacker asked if he was friends with Lily. Bell answered that he was just practicing for his Justice League auditions, which pissed the guy off. The next moment, Ryu showed up, and with a deathly glare and a warning, she made the guy leave, so Bell thanked her for her timely intervention. He then tried to explain what happened, but saw that Lily was gone. Ryu sensed her hiding, but kept quiet about it and advised Bell to be more careful before walking away. The next day, Bell got dressed in his new armor and left while Hestia was still sleeping. When he got close to Babel, Lily approached him and asked if he was looking to hire a supporter. She pretended not to know who he was, and when he insisted that she was the Param girl he'd saved the day before, she revealed that she was a beast girl. Bell curiously rubbed her ears while mumbling to himself that she was the girl from yesterday, but Lily suddenly let out a sound because her ears were sensitive. Bell quickly apologized, and after they sat by the fountain to discuss, he agreed to hire her as his supporter. While they were in the dungeon, Bell handled all the monsters while Lily glazed him non-stop. However, she was mostly interested in his knife and kept asking questions about it. Bell innocently answered it all, then asked which familia she belonged to, and she told him it was the Soma familia. She then reminded him to collect the gem in the last ant monster, but offered him her knife to finish it off. Bell didn't think anything of it, and when he got to the guild later, he told Ina about his new supporter. She warned him to be careful, as the Soma familia members were very desperate for money, even though their familia produced and sold the best booze in the city. Bell didn't think Lily was a bad person and happily showed Aina the bag of gems he collected that day. The receptionist congratulated him and told him to exchange them, but the moment she turned around, she noticed his knife was missing and told him. Bell immediately assumed he'd lost it, so he ran out of the guild to search for it, while Lily was busy trying to sell the knife. Unfortunately for her, the knife only worked if Bell was the one using it, so the store owner offered to pay her a small amount since he couldn't even use it to cut anything. Lily believed he was trying to rip her off, so she took it and left in anger. As she walked, she passed by Ryu and Seer, so she quickly hid the knife, but Ryu had already spotted it. She called out to her, asking to see the knife, and when Lily refused, Ryu stopped being nice and flicked a coin at Lily's hand, forcing her to drop the knife. However, instead of picking it back up, Lily ran towards the street and bumped into Bell. When Ryu caught up with her, she wondered if she had the wrong person, because Lily was in her beast folk form. Bell was shocked to see the waitresses, then asked if Eater had seen his knife. Ryu immediately gave it to him, and the overjoyed Bell asked where she found it. She revealed that a thief had it, and even though she didn't accuse Lily outright, the girl kept her back turned. But her tense shoulders gave her away, so Seer advised her not to go overboard with her tricks and left with Ryu. The still clueless Bell then asked Lily to accompany him to the dungeons the next day, and she agreed. While they were in the dungeon the next day, Lily noticed that his knife wasn't in its usual spot at his back. He explained that he didn't want to lose it again, so he put it in his protector. Later, after exchanging their gems for coins, Lily was surprised when Bell gave her half of the earnings and even thanked her for being his partner. This seemed to be something she wasn't used to, so she quietly called Bell a weirdo under her breath. Meanwhile, inside the guild, Ina witnessed a Soma Familia member complaining at the exchange counter because he believed he deserved more than he was given. She wondered whether Bell would be okay. As the sun began to set, Freya picked up a book and told herself that it was time for Bell to show her what he was made of. Later at night, Lily was bullied by members of her familia, who took her money and kicked her down some stairs. After they walked off, Lily didn't bother to stand up and consoled herself with the fact that her debt to them would someday be repaid. She also swore to steal Bell's knife again, but when she recalled him being nice to her, her conscience started bugging her. The next day, while Bell was in the dungeon with Lily, earning his Monster Slayer badge, he found himself in a tight spot, so Lily used fire magic to save him. After thanking her, he asked about the magic she'd used, and she admitted that she'd used a magic blade. Bell was extremely surprised that she'd used such a priceless item for his sake, and she brushed it off with an awkward response. Later, when they sat down to eat, Lily told Bell that she couldn't make it the next day because it was her familia's General Assembly days. When she began apologizing, Bell cut her off, saying he should have been more attentive to her needs. This just made her feel even worse about what she planned to do to him, but Bell didn't even notice her change of reaction. The next day, he dropped by the restaurant to drop off the bento box Seer had given him the previous day and asked for tips on how to spend his day off. Seer said she usually read on her day off and then lent him a book that looked very similar to the one Freya had been looking at days before. The most suspicious thing was that someone had coincidentally left the book at the restaurant. It was a book about magic, so Bell was very intrigued because he'd wanted to use magic for the longest time. According to the book, all he had to do was have a deep desire for magic before his magic could awaken. So Bell began self-reflection, starting with what magic meant to him. Once he figured that out, he moved on to what he wished to gain from wielding magic. And he told himself that he wanted to be like the hero in the book his grandfather used to read to him. His conscience teased him for having such a basic dream, And Bell replied that it wasn't a bad one either, as it reflected who he was. The next moment, bright lights began swirling around and lodged themselves into his chest. When he eventually opened his eyes, Hestia was calling out to him, and he figured he'd fallen asleep while reading. While she was updating his stats later, she teased him about trying to jumpstart his brain by reading, but then got shocked when she saw that he gained a magic skill. Bell was super excited about the new development, and Hestia explained that he had a rare type of magic that didn't require an incantation. Since it was already late, she suggested that he test it out the next day when he went to the dungeon. But the boy was too impatient, so later that night while she slept, he snuck out and went to the dungeon to do a test run. The magic he gained was Firebolt, and the boy went to town on every monster he came in contact with. Unfortunately, he used way too much magic and passed out in a corridor somewhere in the dungeon. Shortly after, Riveria and Eyes happened to come by, and Riveria immediately deduced that he was suffering from mind down. The moment Eyes recognized him, she asked Riveria to let her take care of Bell because she felt obligated, and Riveria agreed. When Bell awoke later to find himself in Eyes' lap, he panicked and literally rolled away, leaving her wondering why he did that every time he saw her. Later at home, Bell hid under his blanket while crying over how he'd embarrassed himself again in front of Eyes. His sobs woke Hestia up, and she assumed he'd had a nightmare because of the book he read. However, after she picked it up, she let out a surprised gasp and asked where he'd gotten the book from. Bells told her he borrowed it, and when he mentioned that he intended to return it later, she revealed that he couldn't. The book was actually a grimoire, and once it was read, the words on the pages disappeared. As expected, the boy panicked and said he had to return to the restaurant to apologize and pay for the book. Hestia told him not to be stupid and revealed that grimoires were as expensive as a first-class Apestis Familia weapon. The only way he'd get that kind of money was if he sold his soul to the devil, and that might still not be enough. However, Hestia assured him she would sort out the situation, then tried to leave. Bell didn't have to be a genius to understand what she planned to do, so he stopped her and went to the restaurant himself. He sincerely apologized for what happened and promised to pay for it, but Mia told him not to bother. According to her, it was the idiot's fault for leaving the book behind, and she refused to listen when Bell tried to say otherwise. Meanwhile, Aina was out shopping when she ran into Riveria and Loki, and decided to get some information about the Soma Familia from them. Loki made sure to leave the shop with a container of the Soma Familia, then revealed that the Familia actually worshipped their booze rather than Soma. Later, while Lily was on her way to meet Bell, some members of her Familia followed her. While they were speaking to her, Bell spotted them and tried to help her, but the adventurer he'd clashed with the day he met Lily blocked him. He proposed that Bell join him to steal Lily's money, but it pissed Bell off, so he told the guy off. After the guy walked away, Bell turned to see Lily standing behind him. She asked about what he'd discussed with the guy, and Bell swore it was nothing, but Lily didn't believe him. As they began heading to the dungeon, she told herself it was time to cut ties with Bell. The thing is, she lost her parents to the dungeons at a very young age, and since then, she'd been doing everything to survive. Unfortunately, the adventurers she worked for treated her worse than they would a slave, and they never paid her properly. When she tried doing something else, they tracked her down and destroyed it, so she had no one else but them to turn to, even though she hated them with her being. While she was reminiscing, a slightly drunk Loki was spilling unfiltered tea about her Familia to Aina. Earlier, she revealed that the members of the Familia worshipped their booze, and she meant it in the literal sense. Apparently, they had a special brew they didn't sell to the public, and rumor had it that one sip would have you swaying like a little boat on the stormy sea. In fact, the only reason people joined the Familia was to gain access to the special brew, but only those who brought in enough money actually got to taste it. That was why they became desperate when it came to money, not caring how they got it or who they betrayed or hurt to get it. Aina couldn't believe what she'd heard, but she thanked Loki for the info. Loki then left with Eyes to update her stats, but Aina stayed behind to chat with Riveria. Suddenly, they heard Loki scream that Eyes was now a level 6, and Aina spat out her tea in surprise. The next day, when he and Lily went to the dungeon, the shortstop suddenly suggested that they go to the 10th floor. Bell was skeptical because he didn't think he had leveled up enough, but the girl was good at talk no jutsu, so he changed his mind. On their way there, she gave him a short sword, claiming it was better since it had a longer reach than his knife and would be better when dealing with larger monsters. Impressed by her foresight, Bell agreed to keep the sword, and that was how he got tricked into moving his knife from its safe spot. Meanwhile, Aina ran into Eyes outside Babel, thanked her for saving Bell, and clarified that the boy had run from her because he was nervous. As they chatted, some guys walked by and overheard them say it was time for Lily to get rid of Bell. They also seemed to have their own agenda, which worried Arena, so she asked Eyes for help. Back in the dungeon, Bell and Lily were already on the 10th floor, which looked like an uncolored manga panel. Before they could even start exploring, a large orc approached them from the shadows, and Bell's instinct told him to flee. However, Lily told him not to be a coward, and since he didn't want to be renamed Bell, the professional wimp, he decided to fight. He slashed the orc's side and its leg before stabbing it clean through the chest. Unfortunately, another one showed up, so Bell attacked it multiple times with his firebolt spell before the mutated Shrek finally turned to dust. Excitedly, he turned to celebrate with Lily but discovered that she was gone. When he tried to search for her, someone tossed monster luring balls towards him, and in the blink of an eye, Bell was surrounded. Still, he kept calling out to Lily, begging her to respond so he could get her. The response he got was Lily using her small arrows to cut the straps of his small bag, which had his knife, and swiping it away with an arrow that had a rope. She then gave him an insincere apology and said things wouldn't have happened that way if he hadn't spoken to the adventurer from the previous day. With a final note, she wished him luck and then left him to fight the monsters alone. On her way out, she said an incantation to remove her fake ears and tried to convince herself that Bell deserved what he got. Before proceeding, she hid his knife in her socks and told herself that she was doing everything for her freedom. Just as she arrived on another floor, she tripped over the adventurer. Apparently, he was one of the guys Aina and Eyes had overheard earlier, and they had split up to find Lily because they knew she would betray Bell. After beating her up, he pulled off her coat, which had many potions and a magic blade. He felt so proud of himself, but then one of the guys he teamed up with arrived, and it was no surprise that he belonged to the Soma Familia. He asked the adventurer to turn over everything he'd taken, and when the guy refused, he threw a dying ant at him. The guy immediately screamed at him, since dying ants sent signals that attracted their friends, but the other guy didn't care. In fact, his friends brought a few more, and so the guy decided to leave, but unfortunately, he died at the hands of the approaching ants. The Soma Familia guys then told Lily to hand over all her loot if she wanted them to help her escape. Lily immediately handed over the key to her safety deposit box at the bank, but since the men weren't honorable, they left her behind to act as bait while they escaped. As Lily lay there, she wondered whether this was retribution for what she'd done to Bell. She also felt that it was the perfect end to her miserable life, but she couldn't help but feel bitter about it. Suddenly, Bell showed up and blasted some of the ants with his firebolt spell. He then began slaying the remaining ants without mercy, while Lily just knelt there, staring at him in shock. When he finished, she asked how he'd survived the orc attack, and he explained that another adventurer had arrived and helped him. He didn't see who it was because of the mist, but it was thanks to that person that he was able to come and save her. At this, Lily lost it and admitted all the wrong things she did to him because, apparently, the guy was too dense to deduce it on his own. Despite all that, Bell told her he would save her 1,000 times over because it was Sanji's first rule: never ignore a woman in distress. At this, she began calling him all sorts of names, and when she lost her steam, he admitted that he didn't need a reason to save his friend, so Lily cried even harder. The next day, Freya sat in her office talking to herself as usual, and this time, she was impressed by how much stronger Bell had gotten. However, she felt that his hesitation to make decisions was weakening him and decided to give him another push. Later that same day, Bell took Lily to meet Hestia, and while he was away making tea, Hestia got the chance to speak freely with Lily. She told Lily that, even though Bell had forgiven her, she hated her for what she did to him. However, Lily was the only one she could trust to look after Bell because the boy was too nice and dumb for his own good. Lily felt relieved after hearing this, and when Hestia heard Bell coming, she quickly made it clear that Lily wasn't allowed to shoot her shot at him. She even latched onto his arm to stake her claim, but Lily wasn't the type to be intimidated, so she also latched onto Bell's other arm, drawing the battle line. As they tried to stare each other down, Bell broke free and ran away, claiming he had a meeting with Irina. When he arrived at the guild, he found Aina speaking to Eyes and tried to run away again, only to bump into a muscle daddy and fall. This allowed Eyes to catch up to him, but the wimpy fanboy still freaked out and would have escaped again if Aina hadn't stopped him. She explained that Eyes only wanted to speak to him, so Bell agreed to listen. Surprisingly, Eyes returned Bell's protector, because she found it after defeating the orcs the other day. The revelation that she was the one who saved him was another shock, but he kept his cool and listened as Eyes apologized for the Minotaur incident. When she began blaming herself, he cut her off and said she'd done nothing except save him. He insisted that he was the one who ought to apologize to Eyes for always running away whenever he saw her. After their little talk, they left the guild together, and Eyes asked how dungeon diving was going since he'd already gotten to the 10th floor. Bell admitted that it was pure luck and said he was still very far away from achieving his goal. At this, she asked whether he had a sparring partner and offered to be that one. Bell was shocked by this, but he was also grateful and met Eyes on the city wall early the next day. She asked for his knife and then showed him a few moves, but Bell thought she was just playing until she kicked him in the face. This knocked him down, but he got back up and prepared to spar with Eyes. She was considerate enough to use her scabbard instead of her sword, and when Bell took a defensive stand, she commended him. However, she pointed out that he still feared something. Almost immediately, the image of the Minotaur appeared in his mind, so he tightly gripped his knife and attacked Eyes. The Sword Princess easily dodged the attack and told him not to use his desperation to fuel his attacks. She then moved behind him and attacked him while saying that he should always be aware of his surroundings. Bell tried to retaliate, but Eyes dodged his attacks and landed a few on him, but that didn't discourage Bell in the slightest. Just when he thought he could finally land a hit, Eyes smacked him in the head with her weapon, making it clear that he still had a lot to learn. Days later, one of Freya's men, named Otterol, was in the dungeon slaying minotaurs, like he was preparing to host a barbecue. It turned out the so-called push Freya was talking about was another minotaur attack on Bel. Otto thought all the minotaurs weren't worthy, but then one began fighting back, so Otto gave him a large sword and told him to show him what it could do. Meanwhile, Bel and Lily were on the 10th floor, and as they walked around, some of Dobby's extended family approached them. Bel quickly pulled out his knife and instructed Lily to move back. Lily did as she was told, but began shooting her arrows from her spot. This gave Bel an advantage, and since he'd been training with eyes, his attacks were more coordinated than before. Some orcs soon joined the show, so Lily suggested falling back, but Bel refused and charged at them. Back where Otterol was, the Minotaur was still alive and doing its best to win against Otterol, but the guy was too strong. After he broke off its horn, the monster got pissed and tried to finish him off with the sword he gave it. Later, Bel met with Eyes again and got another beating, but he kept getting back up. While they were resting, Eyes curiously asked Bel how he managed to get stronger so easily, and he answered that it was because there was someone he wanted to catch up with. Eyes obviously didn't understand how that worked, but she didn't pry. When she suddenly yawned, she told Bel that their next lesson would be taking a nap because it was an essential skill for surviving in the dungeon. Bel pointed out that she just wanted to nap, but the girl insisted it was training and then lay down. In a few seconds, she was in the dream world, and as Bel stared at her, a floating light came to him. It sounded like his grandpa and advised him to steal a kiss, but another light, which sounded like Lily, showed up and told him not to act like an untrained degenerate. Eventually, both orbs began arguing, and the dumb Bel found himself leaning in to kiss Eyes as his grandfather wanted. Suddenly, Eyes mumbled the word wait, so the guy panicked and moved back like he'd been electrocuted. Back in the dungeon, the Minotaur proved itself to Otterol by breaking his sword, and it let out a victory roar. A little later, Eyes and Bel returned to the city, and she offered to buy him something to eat because his stomach was protesting. However, he was very surprised when the vendor turned out to be Hestia, and she wasn't happy to see him with Eyes. They had to move to a quiet alley to talk, and Bel explained that Eyes was teaching him to fight until the Loki Familia went on their expedition. Hestia agreed to the alliance, but warned Eyes not to try to steal Bel away from her. She even jumped on him to stake her claim to him, only to end up headbutting him when she realized his face was against her plots. The next day, Bel came across a poster announcing that Eyes was a level 6. Those around whispered that she had single-handedly defeated the floor boss of the 37th floor, and that reminded Bel how wide the gap between them really was. As he walked around sulking like a loser, Seer suddenly called out to him and rushed over. Bel immediately became worried, thinking something bad had happened, only to be roped into working as a human dishwasher at the restaurant. Apparently, she ditched work the day before and was being punished by Mia, but now Bel was doing all the work. When Ryu walked in and saw him, she offered to help, so he asked her for some advice since she used to be an adventurer. Ryu told him that if he wanted to rank up, he had to defeat an extremely powerful opponent. However, to be able to achieve that, he had to have a special kind of move or trick that would boost his chances, but added that if he truly intended to become strong enough, he would have to join a party, as working together would boost his chances. The next day, Bel and Eyes sparred on the walls again, and when they finished, she told him it was their last day. Bel thanked her for all her help, and she admitted that spending time with him had been fun. As Eyes walked away, Bel wondered if he'd ever catch up to her, but one thing was clear: he would keep trying. Later, he returned home to gather his things and asked Hestia to keep his stats sheet because he didn't have time to check it. Hestia tried to stop him, but he didn't listen, and she was left staring at the paper in her hands. A few hours later, while the Loki Familia and some members of the Hephaestus Familia gathered outside Babel for their pre-expedition briefing, Otterol informed Freya that their plan was already in motion. The goddess was pleased and said she couldn't wait to witness Bel's new adventure. Meanwhile, Bel was already in the dungeons with Lily, and they noticed that they hadn't seen any monsters since they arrived. There were also no signs of adventurers, and as they walked deeper in, they heard a roar. Immediately, Bel became paralyzed with fear and had to be pushed out of the way by Lily when the Minotaur tried to attack them. Seeing Lily hurt brought him back to his senses, so he began attacking the Minotaur with his firebolt spell, but it was ineffective. The Minotaur then slammed him into the wall, but he got back up and turned to face the monster again. In another part of the dungeon, the expedition party found the injured adventurer the Minotaur had left behind, and he informed them that the Minotaur had gone after another group. The moment Eyes heard it was Bel, she ran off, so Tiona and Beta chased after her. Back in the inner chamber, Bel and the Minotaur were still going at it, and luckily, Bel hadn't gotten injured. The only problem was that he was growing tired and began looking for an opening to escape. Just then, Lily woke up and called out to Bel, but he instructed her to run. Lily didn't want to, but Bel insisted and kept the Minotaur's attention on himself so she could escape. As the fight progressed, Bel stood his ground and thought he was finally making headway until the monster stabbed its horn into his arm and hoisted him. After it tossed him aside like a broken puppet, Bel found that he couldn't get back up, but kept trying either way. Suddenly, Eyes arrived and told him she would finish the monster off, but Belle didn't want to be saved by her again. He believed that if she did, he would never reach his goal. So he forced himself to stand and told her he would finish the fight himself. Shortly after Tiona and Beta arrived, the rest of their familia also turned up and stood back to watch the epic showdown. It was the unspoken rule of the dungeon never to take away anyone's prey, but Beta found it amusing that Belle was fighting a minotaur. Tiona tried to convince Eyes to stop Belle, but the girl didn't budge. Lily then begged Beta to save Belle instead, and she kept doing that until she passed out. Seeing this, the annoying wolf decided to intervene, but stopped in his tracks when he noticed that Belle was actually keeping up with the minotaur. Tiona even questioned whether Belle was a level 1 because he moved with the precision of a well-trained soldier and didn't back down once. Belle, on the other hand, was being fueled by his desire to prove himself and become a hero. He ruthlessly attacked the monster, not giving it a chance to fight back properly, and Freya, who was somehow watching the entire showdown, was very excited. The Loki familia soon began giving commentary on Belle's moves, and even though they agreed that he was doing well, they didn't think he could actually finish the monster off. As they watched on, Belle proved himself with slash after slash, and soon the climax scene arrived. Belle and the Minotaur charged at each other like they were a matador and a bull in Plaza de Toros. Then he cut it multiple times before lodging his knife in its gut and using it to channel his firebolt spell into it. Everyone could only watch in shock as the Minotaur swelled and burst into a flaming torch. Belle didn't move an inch as he had mentally and physically clocked out and had been running purely on adrenaline. When the crew got close, Betty asked Riveria to read Belle's stats, and she confirmed that all of his abilities were ranked S. Curious, Finna asked Eyes what Belle's name was, and she proudly told him. That night, while Belle slept, Hestia watched over him and quietly told him that he had just written the first page of his entire life. Days later, a healed Belle played with the Minotaur's horn while Hestia updated his status. She'd already informed him that he was now a level 2, but he admitted that he didn't feel any different. Hestia began teasing him, saying he should try going Super Saiyan and then maybe he would feel powerful. She then casually informed him that he had a skill called Argonaut, and Belle almost lost his damn mind from excitement. Hestia smiled at him knowingly and revealed that he'd unlocked that skill because he was dreaming of becoming a hero. However, she suddenly started teasing him again, and Belle's face went hot rod red before he screamed at her to get off his case. Later, while he lay on the couch sulking, Hestia advised him to figure out how to use his new skill in combat and told him to cheer up before she returned. At this, Belle turned to look at her and asked where she was heading. Hestia explained that she was attending the quarterly gods meeting to decide the second names of adventurers who had leveled up. She was determined not to let Belle get saddled with an embarrassing name, so she put on her game face once she got to the venue. However, she couldn't keep it on for long as Takemikazuchi tapped her on the shoulder. He told Hestia that Belle had broken Eyes' leveling up record as he leveled up in only a month, whereas the Sword Princess did it in a year. As they began walking, Hestia asked Takemikazuchi about Mikoto, his familia member who had leveled up. The god said she had proven herself, so he would ensure she got a befitting second name, and Hestia said she could relate. Later on, while Belle was cosplaying Cinderella, he wondered what his second name would be. When he stopped, it was to admire the craftsmanship of his now battered armor, but the Hestia suddenly returned with the news he's been waiting for. Unfortunately, the name wasn't as epic as he'd hoped it would be, and he ended up complaining to Lily about it. The girl said she didn't see what was wrong with being called Little Rookie. Even Cyr said the same thing when she and Ryu came to drop off their order. They spoke loudly, so the other adventurers in the establishment began looking at Belle and talking about him. This made him a bit uncomfortable, but the girls advised him to get used to it, since it would happen often. Ryu also advised him to get more party members, as the middle floors of the dungeons were very hard to conquer. At this, an adventurer who had been eavesdropping suddenly approached them and invited Belle to join his party. However, in return, he wanted Belle to allow him and his friends to play with Ryu and Lily. His disgusting request pissed Belle off, but Ryu beat him to the punch and calmly told him to buzz off. The guy tried to convince Ryu that she would have a good time, but the elf wasn't having it. She used a cup to twist his arm, and when he attempted to fight back, Mia slammed the counter with so much force that it broke in half. She then told the guy to go outside and fight if he wasn't interested in whining and dining. Her angry tone put the fear of God into him, so he paid his bill and ran off with his crew. Later, instead of heading home, Belle went to the Hephaestus Familia store to buy new armor, but couldn't find any of Welf's designs. Confused, he went to the counter to inquire and ended up meeting Welf himself. The two then went outside to talk, and when Welf noticed people staring at them, he loudly thanked Belle again for purchasing his designs. At this, the people walked off in anger, and Welf said it was just a territory issue. He also offered to become Belle's exclusive blacksmith if he allowed him to join his adventuring party. Belle saw no problem with this, and the next day, Welf joined him and Lily on the 11th floor. He was so excited, but Lily wasn't and asked why he hadn't joined an adventuring party from his familia. As she kept complaining, Belle asked her to give the guy a chance, so Welf approached her and tried to shake her, but because he called her a pipsqueak, the girl refused. Seeing this, Bell tried to make things right, and when he mentioned Welf's surname, Lily cut him off. Apparently, Welf came from a long line of has-been blacksmiths known for their magic swords. Welf casually brushed the story off, and when Lily tried to ask more questions, monsters showed up, so they turned their attention to them. The monsters were easy to take care of, and Bell took down the last one with his firebolt spell. To his surprise, it was stronger than before, and he couldn't help but feel like he was getting close to eyes. Lily then began picking up gems while Bell chatted with Welf, who exclaimed that being in a party was very nice. Looking around, they noticed other adventurers, so Welf suggested they move to another area to eat lunch. Bell agreed and began walking away, but then Welf noticed his hand was glowing and asked Bell if he was about to transform into a magic girl. Before Bell could respond, the other adventurers screamed and tried to run away from a small dragon. Lily hadn't noticed the dragon, so Bell activated his firebolt to save her, and to everyone's surprise, it came out as an energy blast. That evening, he told Hestia about it, and she confirmed that it was his Argonaut skill, which would manifest when he had to overcome a difficult obstacle. Moving on from the topic, Bell asked Hestia about Welf's family. She said she didn't know much about them, but she asked around about Welf and learned that he could make powerful magical weapons. However, he refused to make any for personal reasons. This left Bell intrigued, but he didn't ask Welf anything about it when they met the next day, and Welf offered to tweak his gear. While they were at his workshop, Welf questioned why Bell hadn't asked him to make a magic weapon for him. He had found out that Hestia was investigating him, so he was convinced Bell knew how skilled he was. He also admitted that he'd invited Bell over to test him and apologized for assuming he was like everyone else who only wanted him for his talent. To make up for it, he used the Minotaur horn Bell found and used it to make another knife for him. As he worked, he explained that he stopped making magic swords because he hated what they represented. Most people saw them as their ticket to the top, and since they relied on them exclusively, they often found themselves in a bind when the weapons failed. Soon, Welf finished Bell's new blade, and they gave it a long-ass name. But before handing it over, Welf asked Bell to treat him the same way he treated Lily, and Bell agreed. The next day, as Hestia made her way to work, she spotted Takemikazuchi sending Mikoto and some members of his familia off, so she approached him after they left. As they chatted, the ground suddenly shook, indicating a micro-earthquake, and Hestia began praying it wasn't a sign that something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, Bell and his friends were in the middle of battling some fire-breathing wolves, but they won. As they began picking up the gems, some white rabbits approached them, and Lily and Welf began calling them Bell. The white-haired boy didn't appreciate the comparison, but his friends didn't really care. Back in the city, the god Hermes was taking a stroll with Asphi, the leader of his familia, and she informed him that the public's opinion on Bell was divided. Some believed that he had slain the Minotaur by luck or was saved by the Loki familia, while some swore that Bell was lying about how long he'd taken to rank up. This intrigued Hermes, so he said he'd like to see Bell and make his own assessments. A little while later, Mikoto and her group tried to outrun some white rabbits and wolves while carrying their injured friend. Unfortunately, in their desperation, their leader, Oka, decided to lead the monsters to Bell's group, and despite Mikoto feeling bad about it, she had to follow his orders. Lily was the first to deduce what was happening, so she screamed at Bell and Welf to move, but the monsters still chased them. At some point, they tried to fight back, but the monsters kept coming back like your toxic ex, and soon enough, Welf got hurt. As if that wasn't bad enough, they soon realized they were surrounded, and as they fought off the monsters, Bell recalled Ryu's warning that the middle floors were a literal death trap. The fight seemed to go on for hours because for every monster slain, at least 2 or 3 more showed up, making the group tired. Suddenly, the roof collapsed because some monsters were burrowing through it, and Bell could have sworn that his life flashed before his eyes. However, thanks to his plot armor, he was unharmed. But poor Welf had a large rock sitting in his leg, and Lily was buried under some rubble. Just when it looked like it couldn't get any worse than that, a fire-breathing wolf showed up and tried to cook them for dinner. During that time, Hestia rushed to the guild to search for them and was informed that they hadn't returned. This set off the alarms in her head, so she submitted a quest to the guild to find them. Just then, Takemikazuchi arrived with a very guilty-looking Mikoto, Aka, and Chigusa, and Hestia knew something was up. Back in the dungeon, Bell and his friends had survived thanks to their cloaks and were trying to find a way out. Welf even joked that they could use him as bait if they got surrounded again, but Bell told him to stop talking nonsense. Lily then proposed that they go down to the 18th floor since it was one of the safe areas in the dungeon where monsters didn't spawn. They could stay with the other adventurers there and then tag along when they decided to return to the surface. She also explained that they would have to use the rifts to get there because trying to find and use the stairs would expose them to more monsters. Her plan was pretty solid, but Welf was worried about the floor boss of the 17th floor. Lily told him to rest easy and reminded them that the Loki familia were on an expedition, so they would have already slain the boss, and if they moved quickly, they could pass through the floor before it respawned. This was risky, but it was their only chance to survive the dungeon, so they turned to Bell for his decision, since he was their leader. Belle agreed to go with the plan and asked Lily to lead the way. Back on the surface, Takemikazuchi apologized to Hestia on behalf of his familia in the presence of Hephaestus, Miyake, and Naza, one of Miyake's familia. Hestia told them that if Belle and his friends failed to return alive, she would never forgive them, but she wouldn't hate them either. She then asked them to redeem themselves by helping her find Belle, and they promised to do that. However, Takemikazuchi said only Oka, Mikoto, and Shigusa could go because they were the strongest. They needed more people, but Hephaestus couldn't help because her strongest members were on the expedition with the Loki familia. Just then, Hermes walked in with Asphi and said he would lend them a hand. Everyone was surprised to see him because he was supposed to be on a trip, but Hermes claimed he'd rush back to help his dear friend Hestia. Hephaestus told him to stop capping because he hadn't once visited or hung out with Hestia since they came to Earth. Hermes complained that she was being harsh, but swore he had really come to help. When he mentioned that Asphi would join the search party, the girl was shocked, so while everyone else was planning, she took him aside to scold him. It was then that Hermes revealed he'd included her in the search party because he wanted to tag along. Asphi reminded him that it was against the rules for gods to enter the dungeon, and Hermes said it would be fine as long as no one else found out. At that moment, Hestia spoke up and told them to take her with them because she couldn't rest until she saw Belle. She was loud enough for the other gods to hear, but they didn't try to discourage her. And Hephaestus even asked her to give Welf a message when she eventually found them. Meanwhile, Belle and his friends were making their way to the 18th floor, and Lily held up a stink bag to keep the monsters away. The smell was so bad that Welf started complaining, so the tiny lady shook the bag in their faces and told them to shut up. As they continued walking, they encountered a wolf which tried to blast them, but Welf used wind magic to reverse the blast, causing the wolf to blow up. It took a toll on him, but he assured his friends that he could keep going. At that time, Freya had discovered that Hermes was getting involved with Belle, and even though she wasn't happy about it, she decided to keep watching. A while later, Lily's stink bag ran out of stink, and almost immediately, the monsters started pulling up, so Belle had to face them alone. Meanwhile, Hestia and the search team were about to enter the dungeon when Ryu arrived and asked to join them. Hestia didn't know who she was, but Hermes vouched for her. As the night dragged on, the search team located the site of the roof collapse, and Hestia grew worried when she spotted one of Belle's knives. However, she relaxed after Ryu climbed to the top and confirmed that Belle and the others weren't there. Asphi then correctly deduced that they were headed to the 18th floor, so they all decided to head there as well. Meanwhile, Belle's group encountered many other monsters and was forced to defend themselves to the point of exhaustion. After Welf and Lily suddenly passed out, Belle had to carry them. It was a struggle, and when he got to the entrance of the 17th floor, he tripped, and they all tumbled down. Back on the top floor, Hestia asked Hermes why he was suddenly interested in Belle, and he admitted that someone had asked him to check Belle out. However, he came down there to see for himself whether Belle could shoulder the new era. At that moment, Belle was struggling to reach the 18th floor with his friends, and just when it looked like they would make it, the rumbling began. Using his last bit of strength, Belle kept running and didn't stop until they were in the clear. Their fall sent them straight to the 18th floor, and just as Belle was about to pass out, someone walked over to them, so he pleaded with them to save his friends. When he woke up later, he had a bandage on his head and was in a tent with eyes. She was the unknown person who had found them at the entrance, so she brought them back to her group's camp for treatment. She said Welf and Lily were sleeping in another tent after their injuries had been treated by Reveria, and asked him to come with her to speak to their leader. Reveria and a guy named Gareth were also there, so Belle thanked them all for helping him and his friends. Finney said Belle and his friends were their guests and revealed that they were waiting for their comrades to return with an antidote for their poisoned members. This meant they would remain on the 18th floor for a while, so Eyes decided to show him around. The moment she opened the door, they ran into Tiona and Tion, who were very excited to see Belle. Tiona had become his biggest fan since the Minotaur incident, and as she rubbed against him, her sister told Belle that he was pretty impressive. When she leaned forward, her plots jiggled, and because Belle noticed, he grew redder than a tomato. They immediately began teasing him, and the poor boy grew so embarrassed that he couldn't even form words. Eventually, Eyes led him to another part of the forest, and Belle asked if they were truly inside the dungeon. He got his answer when they reached a clearing, and he spotted the crystals lining the roof. Eyes explained that when the light faded from the crystals, it would imitate nighttime, and Belle didn't believe it until it happened. During that time, he was in the tent where his friends were sleeping. When they woke up, he was very relieved, but then they started apologizing for passing out on him and becoming burdens. Belle swore that he didn't think that way and said that if it wasn't for their efforts, none of them would have made it to the 18th floor. This made them relax, and when Eyes came to call them for dinner, they were genuinely surprised to see her. Later, they gathered outside with everyone else, and after a brief welcoming speech from Finna, they all began eating. Eyes even offered Belle a fruit she'd picked from the forest, but it was too sweet, so he couldn't finish it. Lily asked him to give it to her, but Welf stole it and ate it, much to her annoyance. As she began kicking Welf, Tiona and Tioni came to Belle and asked him how he got all his abilities to rank S. Eyes was also curious, but since she was the nonchalant queen, She just moved her hair behind her ears so she could hear better. The attention made Belle start sweating like a pig, but then the sound of continuous screaming cut through the air. The voice sounded very familiar, so Eyes rushed to find the owner and was surprised when he found Hestia, who had just rolled down from the 17th floor. She excitedly tackled him to the ground, and once she confirmed that it was really him, she began crying tears of relief. However, the touching moment only lasted a few moments before Lily yanked Hestia off Belle, saying he was still healing from his injuries. It was then that Hestia noticed Eyes, and when she started complaining, Ryu, Hermes, and Asfi showed up. Hermes happily introduced himself to Belle, and Belle thanked him for risking his life for them. Hermes refused to accept his thanks and told him to direct it to Mikoto and her friends. Upon seeing the people who had caused their predicament, Welf and Lily tensed and decided to go to their tent to talk. Mikoto sincerely apologized for what they had done, and Belle assured her that he bore them no grudge. His friends, on the other hand, weren't so forgiving, and they made it known. Akka then asked them to direct their anger at him since he was the leader, but admitted that he would still make the same decision, which pissed Welf off. As they stared each other down, Belle spoke up, saying he might have made the same call if the roles were reversed. Hearing this, Lily and Welf agreed to be like Elsa and let it go, but Welf made it very clear that he wouldn't forget it. Later, as the boys were leaving for another tent, Chigusa called out to Welf and handed over the weapon Hephaestus had sent to him, while Hestia gave him the message. Hours later, while everyone was fast asleep, Belle went to stare at the dungeon's crystals. Eyes happened to find him there and admitted she'd come because she was worried about him, and Belle immediately went red and then panicked for a few more seconds. After he calmed down, she told him about the adventurer's town on the 18th floor and asked if he'd like to visit it with her. The next moment, they heard Hestia's voice and saw that she had latched onto Belle's arm without anyone noticing. She then used her inside angry voice to tell Belle how cruel he was for planning a date with someone who wasn't her. When she finished, she turned on Eyes and began complaining too, but all the girl heard was the word date, and she became confused. Meanwhile, in another area, Welf sat with the weapon from Hephaestus as he recalled a previous conversation with her. Back then, she told him that she would respect his decision to stop making magic weapons, but said he would regret not using his ability when the time came. Welf couldn't help but feel like the time Hephaestus spoke about had arrived, and he was very conflicted. The next day, almost everyone decided to visit the adventurer's town, and as they looked around, Belle noticed Hestia wasn't clinging to him anymore. Eyes directed him towards the perfume vendor Hestia was haggling with, and when he tried to go to her, he accidentally bumped into Mord, the adventurer who had invited him to join his party. The guy was still holding a grudge against Belle over his humiliation, but when his friends drew his attention to Eyes, Tiona, and Tyone, he backed down. Later on, Hestia came to show off her new perfume to Belle but got into an argument with Lily. To sort out the situation, Tiona invited everyone to take a bath at the lake after they returned to camp, and they all agreed. Suddenly, Hermes slung his arm over Belle's shoulder and told him he wanted to have a private chat with him while the girls were bathing. A little while later, Beta, who had just returned from the surface with the antidotes, nearly choked when he spotted Belle in camp. Finn explained that a lot had happened while he was away, and that made him crash out even more. Meanwhile, Hermes led Belle to a tree in the forest, and it wasn't until Belle had joined him on one of the branches that he realized the god wanted him to be a peeping Tom. As the well-mannered gentleman that he was, Belle complained, but Hermes insisted that peeping was the spice of a man's life. Coincidentally, those were the same words his grandfather used to tell him, and Belle couldn't believe it. He tried to convince Hermes to leave with him, but the god suddenly twirled, causing Belle to fall into the water. Only Mikoto and Chigusa were shocked to see him, but Asfi deduced that Hermes was the main culprit. Poor Belle didn't know where to look, and the moment he spotted Eyes, he panicked and fled. He didn't stop running until he was far enough, but then realized that he'd stumbled upon Ryu, who was also taking a bath. The elf nearly shot his head off when she sensed his presence, so, as any logical person would do, Belle began groveling and apologizing for viewing her goods. Ryu was surprisingly chill after she got dressed, and he explained what happened. So Belle asked how she was so sure he was telling the truth. In response, Ryu told him to stop putting himself down and continued walking. Belle followed her to thank her for coming to search for him, but she said he wasn't the only reason she'd come. At that moment, they arrived at a clearing where some old swords lay in a sand pile. Ryu explained that it was the grave site of the former members of her familia, and revealed that they had all died after falling into a trap set by another familia. Ryu was the only survivor, so she became the Punisher and didn't stop until all the members of that familia met the grim Ray Yapper. Her actions led to her being blacklisted by the guild, but she didn't care since she'd gotten her revenge. Just as she was about to give up on life, Asfi found her, and that was how she joined Mia's staff. She told Belle she was telling him her story so he could see she wasn't the good person he thought she was, but he disagreed. He threw her advice about not looking down on himself back at her and told her to have a little faith in herself. Hearing this, Ryu held his hand and told him that he was a human worthy of her respect and more. Later at night, a drunk Mord complained to his friends about Belle and said they had to teach him a lesson. As he began thinking about how to get Belle alone, the answer walked right into the bar. The next day, Bette popped off on Belle, asking why he dared to peep on Eyes. However, he was dragged away by Tion and Tiona before he could do anything, and they told him that Hermes was to blame for the incident. As he struggled against them, Eyes approached him and informed him that she was leaving with the first party. Belle asked her to take care of herself, and Eyes asked him to do the same. Suddenly, they sensed they were being watched, and that person turned out to be Hestia. However, she closed the tent flap and began complaining about how Belle paid attention to everyone but her. The next moment, an invisible person grabbed her, so when Belle walked into the tent, all he found was her perfume and a note. Immediately, he rushed to the location written on the note and met Mord waiting for him. The guy assured him that Hatia was safe, but said Belle had to fight him if she wanted her back safe and sound. Belle agreed, not knowing that Mord planned to cheat, and he only realized it when he got punched out of nowhere. He took a few more punches, and when he fell to the ground, Mord added a few more. Meanwhile, Hermes and Asfi were watching from a hill, and it was revealed that Hermes was the one who gave the magic item to Mord. Asfi told him that he was despicable, but Hermes claimed he was only trying to show the innocent Belle the dark side of humanity. He believed that if Belle couldn't handle reality, then he wasn't who he thought he was. Suddenly, he sensed Belle's friends, who made their presence known when Mikoto shot arrows at the adventurers who were spectating the match. As they clashed, the idiots watching over Hestia decided to leave her and join the party. Almost immediately, Lily showed up, disguised as a white rabbit, and when she changed back, she told Hestia that she found her thanks to her horrible perfume. Back at the battleground, one of the idiots who had left Hestia alone tried to attack Welf, but he missed and instead cut the straps holding his weapon to his body. Welf was momentarily distracted watching it fall into the forest, so the second guy tackled him to the ground. However, before he could attack him, Ryu knocked him out with her stick and then did the same to his friend. Meanwhile, Belle, who Mord was still beating, suddenly turned the tables and began returning the favor. Initially, Mord thought it was just a fluke, but Belle proved that it wasn't, and in the end, he destroyed Mord's invisibility item with a powerful kick. Still, Mord refused to accept his failure, and as he tried to cut Belle, Hestia arrived and released her powers. Immediately, the fighting halted, and Mord's friends ran for their lives before Mord remembered he also had feet. Once they were all gone, Hestia changed back and ran to hug Belle. She also started crying and apologizing for putting him in danger, but he assured her that she wasn't to blame. Suddenly, the place started shaking, and Ryu's gut told her that what was coming next wasn't going to be good. The crystals all lost their light, and the next moment, the Shiganshina incident unfolded live before them. As the floor boss roared, other monsters emerged from God knows where and began attacking people. Belle immediately insisted on going to help, but Ryu asked if he was sure that their mismatched party was what he wanted to use to play hero. Belle glanced at everyone, and after getting a few nods of approval, he told Ryu that he was sure. Ryu said he was a failure as a leader, but agreed to go with him. So Belle asked Chigusa to watch over Hestia in his absence. The rest accompanied him, and they arrived just in time to save Mord from getting punched by a minotaur. Lily was the one who dragged him to safety, and she told him to be grateful that Belle was too nice for his own good. As the floor boss let out another angry roar, Asfi went to the town to request backup, but Maurice, one of the leaders, said she was crazy if she thought they could defeat it. Asfi told him that they didn't really have a choice, because all the exits had been sealed off by rubble, so they either had to wait to die or do something about the problem. At this, Maurice mobilized the adventurers and told them that anyone who refused to join the fight would be permanently kicked out of the town. Before they arrived at the scene, Ryu and the others were taking turns trying to cut down the monster, but it was too powerful. Welf used his wind magic to stop its howling attack, but the monster regenerated its mouth and tried to retaliate. Ryu's timely intervention was what prevented Welf from becoming history, so he thanked her and rushed off. Ryu stayed back to continue engaging the monster, but she knew that it would take a miracle to defeat it. As she moved to re-strategize, Asfi approached her and asked her to keep the monster occupied while the reinforcement attacked from different directions. Ryu agreed but said it would be better if there were 2 decoys, and then left before Asfi could protest. Seeing this, Maurice ordered his people to attack, and they did, but the monster almost blasted him away. Still, that didn't stop the group, and they continued attacking the monster from every angle. Even Belle tried to pull a Levi Arkerman, but his cuts did not deal any real damage to the monster. Eventually, the mages finished their incantations and let their magic loose on the monster, but that still wasn't enough to finish it off. Once it regenerated, it decided to repay them for their hospitality, and most of the adventurers were hurt. Seeing this, Ryu asked Belle to handle the lesser monsters while she and Asfu took the big guy. She said it would only be until the mages who could still finish their incantation, but added that they didn't mind doing it for as long as it took. They then rushed off, and Ryu put all she had into her attacks despite Asfi's warning her to be careful. As the fight continued, Belle's Argonaut skill began manifesting again, and when Asfi noticed, she asked Ryu to move out of the way. Coincidentally, the monster was preparing another howl attack, so it clashed with Belle's upgraded firebolt. The result of the blast was half of the monster's head getting blown off, but it still managed to fire another attack at Belle as its head began regenerating. After that, it tried to give Belle a literal smackdown, but Aka got in the way and took the brunt of the attack. A little while later, the girls went to tend to Oka and Belle, and when Hestia arrived, Asfi informed her that his wounds were deep. However, Hestia wasn't worried and asked Ryu and Asfi to keep the monster engaged until Belle woke up because she knew he was the only one who could defeat it. Ryu didn't think so at first. Seeing how serious Hestia was, she decided to trust her. After she left, Hestia and Lily each took Belle's hands in theirs, and Hestia began speaking to him, telling him that everyone was waiting for him to save the day. Belle could hear her, but his body refused to move, no matter how much he willed it to. Hermes soon arrived and started speaking in riddles, but Belle understood what he was saying, as his grandfather used to tell him the same thing. Almost immediately, Belle regained consciousness and began approaching the monster with the weapon Lily had handed him. He swore to himself that he wouldn't fail because he had to protect his friends, and when he reached the monster, he began channeling his power. Everyone watching realized he was using limit off, and even the lesser monsters tried to flee, but the adventurers chased after them. As he continued charging up, Ryu kept attacking the monster while changing an incantation, and Asfi couldn't decide if she was brave or mad. When Mikoto saw this, she began chanting as well, while Wolf rushed to grab his weapon. Not wanting to be left behind, Asfi activated her Hermes sandals and flew up to blind the monster. As it screamed in pain, Ryu unleashed her spell and got grabbed midair, but before it could squash her, Mikoto activated her gravitational field, forcing it to drop Ryu. The monster tried to fight Mikoto's hold against it, and it eventually succeeded, but Welf arrived at that moment with his magic sword and lit it up like the 4th of July. Witnessing a Krazo weapon in action left Asfi in awe, while Welf fell out of the sky after having used up all his power. As for Belle, he finally reached his peak, so he charged at the monster and finished it off with one strike, or so he thought, because the monster was still attempting to regenerate, so Belle had to get closer and destroy its gem before that happened. The adventurers erupted in cheers once the monster was gone, and as his friends praised him, Oka woke up, and Mord finally acknowledged his strength. Hermes, on the other hand, was over the moon and declared that Belle had proven himself to be the last hero of the Zeus familia because, apparently, Zeus was Belle's grandfather. He also said that history was being written and that he would ensure that he saw it to the end himself. That's it for now, but do you think Freya would keep testing Belle even though he has proven himself? If you got this far, comment more to find out what happened next. Also, check out this next video.